I think one of the beginner mistakes with lighting artists is that they think that if I put a lamp over here and I put a light in that lamp, now I'm a lighting artist. But this is far more than this. We are looking to use the environment to craft the shape and the form onto our focal point, onto usually a character. So in this case, I want to consider bounce for a minute as a light source. When I did this render, there was just this head floating in this black void. And so there is no bounce light. In fact, you can see the shadows are just black because there is no light color of a shadow. But the moment that I put a piece of geometry into this scene that the character can sit on, a ground plane, there's light that is going to bounce off of that ground, and it becomes almost a new direction of a light source. If I put a bounce card, a piece of geometry off to the side, this now becomes a fill light source. So this is a common trick for shaping light, is to use bounce cards. We have the negative fill that takes light away. We have bounce card that adds light. We need to think of this as a light source. So let's look at some examples from movies where we can see bounce lights being used as a lighting source. It is quite common to put too much light onto a table and overexpose on the table. You can see it clips to white here, and the light kind of bounces up because it gives good shaping onto the characters in the scene, and that light is now very soft onto the face. We cut into a close-up. You can see that light wrapping around, and it is not a traditional key light coming from 3/4 on top. This is now coming from underneath, and it has a different emotional feeling to it. So let's look at a couple of other examples from different movies where they utilize this technique of having bounce light as a key light, or at least bounce light as a dominant light source. There are some cinematographers that will put a mystery light that is shining in, and it is overexposed right here, so all that light comes up onto the characters, and we can really see this bounce light. It really makes a focal point into the scene of these two characters. Everything is exposed for the characters, and the background is rather dark. Here's another good example where it's a very moody scene. We're exposed for the sunlight, so it is very dark and high contrast, but this little piece of paper that she's holding lets all of that light kind of bounce back up onto her face, and we can understand her character in her face with this very simple one light setup. The light is outside. That's supposedly, it gives the look of sunlight. I'm not sure if it's real sun or whether it's an electric light that is put out the window to mimic sun, but there's a lot of control of light that's bouncing off of these papers in front of her that gives us the prime light source. If that paper wasn't there, her face would just be dark. She'd just be a silhouette. This shot from Amelie, I think, is really beautiful. The lamp is bouncing off of this canvas and really makes this nice bounce light onto the face that is half of the lighting from the face off to screen right. There is a window, and now you get that nice core shadow down the middle. It is using bounce light as a source. Here's a shot from a film called Underwater, where this one flashlight is bouncing into the scene, and then where this light is bouncing, it comes up onto the face, and that is the prime light source onto this character's face as she crawls through this tunnel. So it is all bounce light. There's a lot of mood that you can give from using light in the scene. I can see sunlight back here that justifies there's a pool of light below camera. We get this implied light source that this is bounce light. It might not have been accurate bounce from the sun. They might have actually put a soft source from below, but I understand it because of the positioning of these lights. So this is not a traditional 3-point lighting setup, but I still understand it. Even in animated films, having that idea of a light that bounces off of a surface, that light becomes soft and kind of fills the face of a character, use that as your prime light source. Bounce light is a wonderful thing. I love this environment from Blade Runner 2049. We're using the environment to add to the mood of the character. This is in the main character's kitchen, and there's just like this indirect light that bounces down off of the countertops in the kitchen, and then all of the light under the character forms two underlit rim lights, and then the top is really pretty dark. There is a light from above that makes a little bit of a hair light, and you can see it, mainly just on the hair. But the majority of this character is lit from underneath, like two bounce lights as your shaping lights. I have so much more to teach you if you go to proko.com/vickery. My entire painting light series is now available there. In fact, my Painting Light 103 course is available 20% off now while the pre-sale is happening. We can also have a scene that is more high key, And when I say low key and high key, these are terms that we use for the amount of contrast in a scene. How is the camera exposed? So in a shot, we would call this a low key shot, which means we are balanced for the brighter light sources. So all the shadows go very dark. It's usually very high contrast. So there's really bright light sources and then the shadows are very dark. And this is low key lighting. We also have high key lighting, and this is where you expose for the shadows, not for the main light sources. So the sun is kind of clipping here. It's blowing out, and then I can really see the character in the shadows. So the shadows are easy to understand, but everything else is kind of like overly lit. So this is using bounce light as well. So all the light that is bouncing from this building in the background up onto the character's face becomes an under rim, and the light from this side is also an under rim. And then there's the cool of the sky from on top, a little bit of this cool light onto the top of the nose. And then there could be some negative fill here, but this tree is sort of providing that. It is not only framing the shot geometrically, but it also can be used as a dark source to just kind of give some extra shaping. If you look at his chin, you have light, dark, light, and you get this wrap of light that is coming around the character. So here are a few more examples from films that I think are really interesting to study. This is from Skyfall, and the characters are sitting in a museum, and you would think that maybe they just went into this museum and it had light from above. There's windows above them in this museum. It's in the Louvre in Paris, and that this is how they lit the shot. But having studied cinematography, I know that they brought in these very large bounce cards and diffusion cards to craft and shape the light onto their face, to give a little bright over here, a little rim over here. It's very subtle to see the differences of how they crafted that light into this scene. Here's another scene done from the same cinematographer, Roger Deakins, who has come up with certain techniques for really crafting subtlety into the characters. And one of the tricks is using a cove light. And a cove light is a way to add, to supplement to the environment, extra light to wrap around the face of the character in a very appealing way, where you can see the light kind of fall off. It takes that light and spreads it over the Terminator angle onto the face. Let me talk about this in more detail. So here's a behind the scenes photo of what a cove light is. And you can see a little bit, this flag here is reducing the amount of light that it will be bouncing into the environment. But everything else here, these three pieces of linen have a light source shining onto each one of them. We can't really see behind the camera here, but these three planes of light spread the light and wrap it around the faces. Let me show you another example that was used in a film. If I look at this, I might assume that this light source was lighting her face, and then she has her laptop that gives a little bit of extra fill light from below, but this light is the prime light in the scene. And you would be wrong, because there's an extra supplement to this by doing another cove light in this scene. So there was light sources that were bouncing off of a screen in the similar direction where the practical light is, to give extra light onto her face, and then another one that kind of wraps around the front and is a little bit more dim, and then a third one that comes all the way around the front of her face and is significantly more dim, and this will pull the light around. I have recreated this in computer graphics using my 3D scanned head. So here is what this light source would look like, and if I kind of pull my camera up so you can see what this looks like from afar, the characters, basically the back of their head is lit, and you can't really see much of that light wrapping around because it's behind the character, so it just becomes a rim light. But if I add a secondary light source that comes onto the front of the character, I can get something like this. So you can see supplementing one more light gives a bit more of this effect of the wrapping of the light. If I go ahead and add another light and then another light that slowly diminish in intensity and change in color temperature, I can take that light and add a lot more color complexity to it. It's going to wrap the light in a more subtle, interesting, rich, believable way that will just make this more appealing to our eyes. So here it is as a rim light. So that's accurate lighting, a little bit of wrap. The second part of the wrap, you see the difference here. It's very subtle. And then the third, and it just kind of like softens and adds some color complexity into this. I have used this on films that I have worked on. I have used this even in games that I've worked on to just bring more life and richness to the characters. We're adding extra wrapping of light. Let me show you another way to view this. So you could do a cove light like this, or you can supplement some of your light source. So I have this light here or this scene here where I have just one single light source that is onto a character, and it is a single color light source. So it is even computer graphics, all of the color of this. It has a slight warm tone to it, but as it lights onto the character, it just has this effect. What if I want more complexity and an effect like this? Can you see the difference between these? Well, this one is a little bit more red, yes, but you can see the light that wraps around into the edge of the shadows. So instead of my shadows just going gray, there's adding a little bit of color temperature into the shift as it wraps around the surface. And this is achieved by doing 3 light sources. Here is a larger light source that's more orange and dim, and then a smaller one that is more yellow, and then an even smaller one that is just white, and that just spreads a little bit more light around the surface. This can also be done with simple sunlight. So in working on Uncharted, working on a lot of the different games and films that I've worked on, we have done this technique where we take the sunlight, and first we're gonna soften it a little bit because no sun is truly harsh. Notice the Terminator angle right here is really sharp. So if I just soften that light a little bit, where the shadows can fall off and start to get blurry over distance, that just softens that edge slightly. It makes it a little bit more appealing. Now, if I want to have a more rich look, I can end up with something like this. Notice the difference. It is overall more warm, but I could balance these light sources by cooling down that key light and balancing the warmth of this secondary light source. And I could bring that balance back, but I can see more like right here on the edge of the shadow, there's a little red fringe. Same with along here, there's a little bit of red that has bled into this. And I've done this in a lot of the projects that I've worked on. Let me show you what the process would be. So I would start with a light like this, and then I would add another light source that is more red and has even softer shadows. It's almost like this light is larger, just like I did in the previous example where I have a larger light source. And then I have a third one that's somewhere in between, and I add all 3 of those together, I get this effect. So here it is from the front. So I take this light, and then I'm slowly adding on these extra light sources. And it's just giving a little bit more color complexity to the scene, a little bit of colored shadows. This is really fun stuff to play with. So if we look at a few examples from film where we can actually see this in action, the environment itself has allowed this effect to happen. So we have the color temperature shift out the windows from a desaturated yellow into oranges and into reds through here, and that is affecting the character's face. So as that light wraps around the character's face, you can see that shift in color temperature as well. So it goes desaturated yellows into oranges and into reds as that light wraps around. There's very little fill light here. I can still see the character's eyes, and that fill light is most likely coming from light that's bouncing off the walls and back onto the character, but it's very effective. Also, if I look at a shot like this from Passengers, I can see that complexity in the skin. I can see the shift in color temperature as it wraps around the faces, and all of those different colors working harmoniously together to make a really appealing result. The beauty of light is understanding how to craft it, how to shape it, and how to add just little bits of complexity to this as we are painting. If you like this free lesson, come to see more about my course. This one is the one that I'm most excited about. I've taught in Painting Light 101 and 102 how to paint and how to make believable light, but this is the one that I'm truly excited about, where you can learn about visual storytelling, using light to tell stories. How do you light characters? How do you light environments? How do you paint in such a way that will aid and use light to your advantage for visual storytelling? There's so many different things. This one's double the length of the other 2, and there's just so much information that I've been so excited to share, things that are not often talked about in training in universities, things that I learned from being in the industry, working on actual projects with actual directors, and all the juicy nuggets of things that I could share with you I'm presenting in this course. So go to proko.com/Vickery to see more.